The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 4, by Flavius Josephus, Book 18, Chapter 5, and Chapter 6, Part 1. Chapter 5. Herod the Tetrarch makes war with Aretas, the king of Arabia, and is beaten by him; as also concerning the death of John the Baptist. How Vitellius went up to Jerusalem, together with some account of Agrippa and of the posterity of Herod the Great. About this time Aretas, the king of Arabia Petris, and Herod had a quarrel on the account following. Herod the Tetrarch had married the daughter of Aretas, and had lived with her a great while. But when he was once at Rome, he lodged with Herod, who was his brother indeed, but not by the same mother. For this Herod was the son of the high priest Syrio's daughter. However, he fell in love with Herodias, this last Herod's wife, who was the daughter of Aristobulus their brother, and the sister of Agrippa the Great. This man ventured to talk to her about a marriage between them; which address, when she admitted, an agreement was made for her to change her habitation, and come to him as soon as he should return from Rome. One article of this marriage also was this, that he should divorce Aretas's daughter. So Antipas, when he had made this agreement, sailed to Rome. But when he had done there the business he went about, and was returned again, his wife having discovered the agreement he had made with Herodias, and having learned it before he had notice of her knowledge of the whole design, she desired him to send her to Machaerus, which is a place on the borders of the dominions of Aretas and Herod, without informing him of any of her intentions. Accordingly Herod sent her thither, as thinking his wife had not perceived anything. Now she had sent a good while before, and so all things necessary for her journey were made ready for her by the general of Aretas's army. And by that means she soon came into Arabia, under the conduct of the several generals, who carried her from one to another successively. And she soon came to her father, and told him of Herod's intentions. So Aretas made this the first occasion of his enmity between him and Herod, who had also some quarrel with him about their limits at the country of Gamalitis. So they raised armies on both sides, and prepared for war, and sent their generals to fight instead of themselves. And when they had joined battle, all Herod's army was destroyed by the treachery of some fugitives, who, though they were of the tetrarchy of Philip, joined with Aretas's army. So Herod wrote about these affairs to Tiberius, who being very angry at the attempt made by Aretas, wrote to Vitellius to make war upon him, and either to take him alive, or bring him to him in bonds, or to kill him, and send him his head. This was the charge that Tiberius gave to the president of Syria. Now some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly, as a punishment of what he did against John, that was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him who was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise virtue, both as to righteousness toward one another, and piety towards God, and so to come to baptism; for that the washing with water would be acceptable to him if they made use of it, not in order to the putting away or the remission of some sins only, but for the purification of the body; supposing still that the soul was thoroughly purified beforehand by righteousness. Now when many others came in crowds about him, for they were greatly moved or pleased by hearing his words, Herod, who feared lest the great influence John had over the people might put it into his power and inclination to raise a rebellion, for they seemed ready to do anything he should advise, thought it best, by putting him to death, to prevent any mischief he might cause, and not bring himself into difficulties by sparing a man who might make him repent of it when it would be too late. Accordingly he was sent a prisoner, out of Herod's suspicious temper, to Machaerus, the castle I before mentioned, and was there put to death. Now the Jews had an opinion that the destruction of this army was sent as a punishment upon Herod, and a mark of God's displeasure to him. So Vitellius prepared to make war with Aretas, having with him 2 legions of armed men. He also took with him all those of light armature, and of the horsemen which belonged under the Romans, and made haste for Petra, and came to Ptolemais. But as he was marching very busily, and leading his army through Judea, the principal men met him, and desired that he would not thus march through their land; for that the laws of their country would not permit them to overlook those images which were brought into it, of which there were a great many in their ensigns. So he was persuaded by what they said, and changed that resolution of his which he had taken in this matter. Whereupon he ordered the army to march along the great plain, while he himself, with Herod the Tetrarch and his friends, went up to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice to God, an ancient festival of the Jews being then just approaching. And when he had been there, and been honorably entertained by the multitude of the Jews, he made a stay there for 3 days, within which time he deprived Jonathan of the high priesthood, and gave it to his brother Theophilus. But when on the 4th day letters came to him, which informed him of the death of Tiberius, he obliged the multitude to take an oath of fidelity to Caius. He also recalled his army, and made them every one go home, and take their winter quarters there, since upon the devolution of the empire upon Caius, he had not the like authority of making this war which he had before. It was also reported that when Aretas heard of the coming of Vitellius to fight him, he said, upon his consulting the diviners, that it was impossible that this army of Vitellius's would enter Petra; for that one of the rulers would die, either he that gave orders for the war, or he that was marching at the other's desire, in order to be subservient to his will, or else against whom this army is prepared. So Vitellius truly retired to Antioch, but Agrippa the son of went up to Rome a year before the death of Tiberius, in order to treat of some affairs with the emperor, if he might be permitted so to do. I have now a mind to describe Herod and his family, how it fared with them, partly because it is suitable to this history to speak of that matter, and partly because this thing is a demonstration of the interposition of Providence, how a multitude of children is of no advantage, no more than any other strength that mankind sets their hearts upon, besides those acts of piety which are done towards God. For it happened that, within the revolution of 100 years, the posterity of Herod, which were a great many in number, were, excepting a few, utterly destroyed. One may well apply this for the instruction of mankind, and learn thence how unhappy they were. It will also show us the history of Agrippa, who, as he was a person most worthy of admiration, so was he from a private man, beyond all the expectation of those that knew him, advanced to great power and authority. I have said something of them formerly, but I shall now also speak accurately about them. Herod the Great had 2 daughters by Mariamne, the granddaughter of Hyrcanus. The one was Salampsio, who was married to Phasaelus, her first cousin, who was himself the son of Phasaelus, Herod's brother, her father making the match. The other was Cypros, who was herself married also to her first cousin Antipater, the son of Salome, Herod's sister. Phasaelus had 5 children by Salampsio, Antipater, Herod, and Alexander, and 2 daughters, Alexandra and Cypros, which last Agrippa, the son of Aristobulus, married. And Timaeus of Cyprus married Alexandra. He was a man of note, but had by her no children. Agrippa had by Cypros 2 sons and 3 daughters, which daughters were named Bernice, Mariamne, and Drusius. But the names of the sons were Agrippa and Drusus, of which Drusus died before he came to the years of puberty. But their father, Agrippa, was brought up with his other brethren, Herod and Aristobulus, for these were also the sons of the son of Herod the Great by Bernice. But Bernice was the daughter of Costobarus and of Salome, who was Herod's sister. Aristobulus left these infants when he was slain by his father, together with his brother Alexander, as we have already related. But when they were arrived at years of puberty, this Herod, the brother of Agrippa, married Mariamne, the daughter of Olympias, who was the daughter of Herod the king, and of Joseph, the son of Joseph, who was the brother to Herod the king, the third brother of Agrippa, married Jotape, the daughter of Sampsiguramus, king of Emesa. They had a daughter who was deaf, whose name also was Jotape. And these hitherto were the children of the male line. But Herodias, their sister, was married to Herod Philip, the son of Herod the Great, who was born of Mariamne, the daughter of Simon the high priest, who had a daughter Salome. After whose birth Herodias took upon her to confound the laws of our country, and divorced herself from her husband while he was alive, and was married to Herod Antipas, her husband's brother by the father's side. He was Tetrarch of Galilee. But her daughter Salome was married to Philip, the son of Herod, and Tetrarch of Trachonitis. And as he died childless, Aristobulus, the son of Herod, the brother of Agrippa, married her. They had 3 sons, Herod, Agrippa, and Aristobulus. And this was the posterity of Phasaelus and Salampsio. But the daughter of Antipater by Cypros was Cypros, whom Alexis Celsius, the son of Alexis, married. They had a daughter, Cypros. But Herod and Alexander, who, as we told you, were the brothers of Antipater, died childless. As to Alexander, the son of Herod the king, who was slain by his father, he had 2 sons, Alexander and Tigranes, by the daughter of Archelaus, king of Cappadocia. Tigranes, who was king of Armenia, was accused at Rome and died childless. Alexander had a son of the same name with his brother Tigranes, and was sent to take possession of the kingdom of Armenia by Nero. He had a son, Alexander, who married Jotape, the daughter of Antiochus, the king of Commagena. Vespasian made him king of an island in Cilicia, deserted the Jewish religion, and went over to that of the Greeks. But for the rest of the daughters of Herod the king, it happened that they died childless. And as these descendants of Herod, whom we have enumerated, were in being at the same time that Agrippa the Great took the kingdom, and I have now given an account of them, it now remains that I relate the several hard fortunes which befell Agrippa, and how he got clear of them, and was advanced to the greatest height of dignity and power. Chapter 6. Of the navigation of King Agrippa to Rome, to Tiberius Caesar, and how upon his being accused by his own freedman, he was bound. Also how he was set at liberty by Caius after Tiberius's death, and was made king of the Tetrarchy of Philip. Little before the death of Herod the king, Agrippa lived at Rome, and was generally brought up and conversed with Drusus, the emperor Tiberius's son. Agrippa lived at Rome, and was generally brought up and conversed with Drusus, the emperor Tiberius's son, and contracted a friendship with Antonia, the wife of Drusus the Great, who had his mother Bernice in great esteem, and was very desirous of advancing her son. Now as Agrippa was by nature magnanimous and generous in the presents he made, while his mother was alive, this inclination of his mind did not appear that he might be able to avoid her anger for such his extravagance. But when Bernice was dead, and he was left to his own conduct, he spent a great deal extravagantly in his daily way of living, and a great deal in the immoderate presents he made, and those chiefly among Caesar's freedmen, in order to gain their assistance, insomuch that he was, in a little time, reduced to poverty, and could not live at Rome any longer. Tiberius also forbade the friends of his deceased son to come be put in mind of his son, and his grief would thereby be revived. For these reasons he went away from Rome and sailed to Judea, but in evil circumstances, being dejected with the loss of that money which he once had, and because he had not wherewithal to pay his creditors, who were many in number, and such as gave no room for escaping them. Whereupon he knew not what to do. So, for shame of his present condition, he retired to a certain tower at Malatha, in Idumea, and had thoughts of killing himself. But his wife Cypros perceived his intentions, and tried all sorts of methods to divert him from his taking such a course. So she sent a letter to his sister Herodias, who was now the wife of Herod the Tetrarch, and let her know Agrippa's present design, and what necessity it was which drove him thereto, and desired her as a kinswoman of his to give him her help, and to engage her husband to do the same, since she saw how she alleviated these her husband's troubles all she could, although she had not the like wealth to do it withal. So they sent for him, and allotted him Tiberius for his habitation, and appointed him some income of money for his maintenance, and made him a magistrate of that city, by way of honor to him. Yet did not Herod long continue in that resolution of supporting him, though even that support was not sufficient for him. For as once they were at a feast at Tyre, and in their cups, and reproaches were cast upon one another, Agrippa thought that was not to be borne, while Herod hit him in the teeth with his poverty, and with his owing his necessary food to him. So he went to Flaccus, one that had been consul, and had been a very great friend to him at Rome formerly, and was now president of Syria. Hereupon Flaccus received him kindly, and he lived with him. Flaccus had also with him there Aristobulus, who was indeed Agrippa's brother, but was at variance with him. Yet did not their enmity to one another hinder the friendship of Flaccus to them both, but still they were honorably treated by him. However, Aristobulus did not abate of his ill will to Agrippa, till at length he brought him to ill terms with Flaccus. The occasion of bringing him on which estrangement was this. The Damascens were at difference with the Sidonians about their limits, and when Flaccus was sent to hear the cause between them, they understood that Agrippa had a mighty influence upon him. So they desired that he would be of their side, and for that favor promised him a great deal of money. So he was zealous in assisting the Damascens as far as he was able. Now Aristobulus had gotten intelligence of this promise of money to him of the same. And when, upon a thorough examination of the matter, it appeared plainly so to be, he rejected Agrippa out of the number of his friends. So he was reduced to the utmost necessity, and came to Ptolemais; and because he knew not where else to get a livelihood, he thought to sail to Italy; but as he was restrained from so doing by want of money, he desired Marsyas, who was his freedman, to find some method for procuring him so much as he wanted for that purpose, by borrowing such a sum from some person or other. So Marsyas desired of Peter, who was the freedman of Bernice, Agrippa's mother, and by the right of her testament was bequeathed to Antonia, to lend so much upon Agrippa's own bond and security. But he accused Agrippa of having defrauded him of certain sums of money, and so obliged Marsyas, when he made the bond of 20,000 Attic drachmae, to accept of 25,000 Attic drachmae, to accept of 2,500 drachma as less than what he desired, which the other allowed of, because he could not help it. Upon the receipt of this money, Agrippa came to Anthedon, and took shipping, and was going to set sail. But Herennius Capito, who was the procurator of Jammus, sent a band of soldiers to demand of him 300,000 drachmae of silver, which were by him owing to Caesar's treasury while he was at Rome, and so forced him to stay. He then pretended that he would do as he bid him, but when night came on, he cut his cables and went off, and sailed to Alexandria, where he desired Alexander the Alabarch to lend him 200,000 drachmae, but he said he would not lend it to him, but would not refuse it to Cypros, as greatly astonished at her affection to her husband, and at the other instances of her virtue. So she undertook to repay it. Accordingly, Alexander paid them 5 talents at Alexandria, and promised to pay them the rest of that sum at Dicearchia, Puteoli. And this he did out of the fear he was in that Agrippa would soon spend it. So this Cypros set her husband free, and dismissed him to go on with his navigation to Italy, while she and her children departed for Judea. And now Agrippa was come to Puteoli, whence he wrote a letter to Tiberius Caesar, who then lived at Capreae, and told him that he was come so far in order to wait on him, and to pay him a visit, and desired that he would give him leave to come over to Capreae. So Tiberius made no difficulty, but wrote to him in an obliging way in other respects, and withal told him he was glad of his safe return, and desired him to come to Capreae. And when he was come, he did not fail to treat him as kindly as he had promised him in his letter, to inform him that Agrippa had borrowed 300,000 drachmae, and had not paid it at the time appointed. But when it was demanded of him, he ran away like a fugitive out of the places under his government, and put it out of his power to get the money of him. When Caesar had read this letter, he was much troubled at it, and gave order that Agrippa should be excluded from his presence until he had paid that debt. Upon which he was no way daunted at Caesar's anger, but entreated Antonia, the mother of Germanicus and of Claudius, who was afterward Caesar himself, to lend him those 300,000 drachmae, that he might not be deprived of Tiberius's friendship. So, out of regard to the memory of Bernice his mother, for those two women were very familiar with one another, and out of regard to his and Claudius's education together, she lent him the money, and upon the payment of this debt there was nothing to hinder Tiberius's friendship to him. After this, Tiberius Caesar recommended to him his grandson, and ordered that he should always accompany him when he went abroad. But upon Agrippa's kind reception by Antonia, he betook him to pay his respects to Caius, who was her grandson, and in very high reputation by reason of the good will they bare his father. Now there was one Thallus, a freedman of Caesar, of whom he borrowed 1,000,000 of drachmae, and thence repaid Antonia the debt he owed her, and by sending the overplus in paying his court to Caius, became a person of great authority with him. Now as the friendship which Agrippa had for Caius was come to a great height, there happened some words to pass between them, as they once were in a chariot together, concerning Tiberius, Agrippa praying to God, for they two sat by themselves, that Tiberius might soon go off the stage, who was in every respect more worthy of it. Now Eutychus, who was Agrippa's freedman, and drove his chariot, heard these words, and at that time said nothing of them. But when Agrippa accused him of stealing some garments of his, which was certainly true, he ran away from him. But when he was caught, and brought before Piso, who was governor of the city, and the man was asked why he ran away, he replied that he had somewhat to say to Caesar that tended to his security and preservation. So Piso bound him and sent him to Capreae. But Tiberius, according to his usual custom, kept him still in bonds, being a delayer of affairs, if ever there was any other king or tyrant that was so. For he did not admit ambassadors quickly, and no successors were dispatched away to governors or procurators of the provinces that had been formerly sent, unless they were dead. Whence it was that he was so negligent in hearing the causes of prisoners, insomuch that when he was asked by his friends what was the reason of his delay in such cases, he said that he delayed to hear ambassadors, lest, upon their quick dismission, other ambassadors should be appointed, and return upon him, and so he should bring trouble upon himself in their public reception and dismission; that he permitted those governors, who had been sent once to their government, to stay there a long while, out of regard to the subjects that were under them; for that all governors were naturally disposed to get as much as they can; and that those who are not to fix there, but to stay a short time, and that at an uncertainty, when they shall be turned out, do the more severely hurry themselves on to fleece the people; but if their government be long continued to them, they are at last satiated with the and so become at length less sharp in their pillaging; but that if successors were sent quickly, the poor subjects, who were exposed to them as a prey, would not be able to bear the new ones, while they shall not have the same time allowed them wherein their predecessors had filled themselves, and so grew more unconcerned about getting more. And this because they were removed before they have had time for their oppressions. He gave them an example to show his meaning. A great number of flies came about the sore places of a man that had been wounded; upon which one of the standers by pitied the man's misfortune, and thinking he was not able to drive those flies away himself, was going to drive them away for him. But he prayed him to let them alone. The other, by way of reply, asked him the reason of such a preposterous proceeding, in preventing relief from his present misery. To which he answered, If thou drivest these flies away, thou wilt hurt me worse. For as these are already full of my blood, they do not crowd about me, nor pain me so much as before, but are somewhat more remiss, while the fresh ones that come almost famished, and find me quite tired down already, will be my destruction. For this cause therefore it is that I am myself careful not to send such new governors perpetually to those my subjects, who are already sufficiently harassed by many oppressions, as may, like these flies, further distress them; and so, besides their natural desire of gain, may have this additional enticement to it, that they expect to be suddenly deprived of that pleasure which they take in it. And, as a further attestation to what I say of the dilatory nature of Tiberius, I appeal to this his practice itself. For although he was emperor 22 years, he sent in all but 2 procurators to govern the nation of the Jews, Gratus and his successor in the government, Pilate. Nor was he in one way of acting with respect to the Jews, and in another with respect to the rest of his subjects. He further informed them that even in the hearing of the causes of prisoners he made such delays, because immediate death to those that must be condemned to die would be an alleviation of their present miseries, while those wicked wretches have not deserved any such favor. But I do it that, by being harassed with the present calamity, they may undergo greater misery. End of Book 18, Chapter 5, and Chapter 6.
The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 4, by Flavius Josephus, Book 18, Chapter 6, Part 2. On this account it was that Eutychus could not obtain a hearing, but was kept still in prison. However, some time afterward Tiberius came from Capreae to Tusculanum, which is about 100 furlongs from Rome. Agrippa then desired of Antonia that she would procure a hearing for Eutychus, let the matter whereof he accused him prove what it would. Now Antonia was greatly esteemed by Tiberius on all accounts, from the dignity of her relation to him, who had been his brother Drusus's wife, and from her eminent chastity. For though she was still a young woman, she continued in her widowhood, and refused all other matches, although Augustus had enjoined her to be married to somebody else. Yet did she all along preserve her reputation free from reproach. She had also been the greatest benefactress to Tiberius, when there was a very dangerous plot laid against him by Sejanus, a man who had been her husband's friend, and who had the greatest authority, because he was general of the army. And when many members of the Senate and many of the freedmen joined with him, and the soldiery was corrupted, and the plot was come to a great height. Now Sejanus had certainly gained his point, had not Antonia's boldness been more wisely conducted than Sejanus's malice. For when she had discovered his designs against Tiberius, she wrote him an exact account of the whole, and gave the letter to Pallas, the most faithful of her servants, and sent him to Caprere to Tiberius, who, when he understood it, slew Sejanus and his confederates, so that Tiberius, who had her in great esteem before, now looked upon her with still greater respect, and depended upon her in all things. So when Tiberius was desired by this Antonia to examine Eutychus, he answered, If indeed Eutychus hath falsely accused Agrippa in what he hath said of him, he hath had sufficient punishment by what I have done to him already. But if upon examination the accusation appears to be true, let Agrippa have a care, lest, out of desire of punishing his freedman, he do not rather bring a punishment upon himself. Now when Antonia told Agrippa of this, he was still much more pressing that the matter might be examined into. So Antonia upon Agrippa took the following opportunity. As Tiberius lay once at his ease upon his sedan, and was carried about, and Caius her grandson and Agrippa were before him after dinner, she walked by the sedan, and desired him to call Eutychus, and have him examined. To which he replied, "O Antonia, the gods are my witnesses that I am induced to do what I am going to do, not by my own inclination, but because I am forced to it by thy prayers." When he had said this, he ordered Macro, who succeeded Sejanus, to bring Eutychus to him. Accordingly, without any delay, he was brought. Then Tiberius asked him what he had to say against a man who had given him his liberty. Upon which he said, "O my lord, this Caius, and Agrippa with him, were once riding in a chariot when I sat at their feet. And, among other discourses that passed, Agrippa said to Caius, O that the day would once come when this old fellow will die, and name thee for the governor of the habitable earth. For then this Tiberius his grandson would be no hindrance, but would be taken off by thee, and that earth would be happy, and I happy also." Now Tiberius took these to be truly Agrippa's words, and bearing a grudge withal at Agrippa, because, when he had commanded him to pay his respects to Tiberius, his grandson, and the son of Drusus, Agrippa had not paid him that respect, but had disobeyed his commands, and transferred all his regard to Caius, he said to Macro, "Bind this man." But Macro, not distinctly knowing which of them it was whom he bid him bind, and not expecting that he would have any such thing done to Agrippa, he forbore, and came to ask more distinctly what it was that he said. And Agrippa standing, "For certain," said he, "Macro, this is the man I meant to have bound." And when he still asked, "Which of these is to be bound?" he said, "Agrippa." Upon which Agrippa betook himself to make supplication for himself, putting him in mind of his son, with whom he was brought up, and of Tiberius his grandson, whom he had educated; but all to no purpose, for they led him about bound, even in his purple garments. It was also very hot weather, and they had but little wine to their meal, so that he was very thirsty. He was also in a sort of agony, and took this treatment of him heinously. As he therefore saw one of Caius's slaves, whose name was Thaumastus, carrying some water in a vessel, he desired that he would let him drink. So the servant gave him some water to drink, and he drank heartily, and said, "O thou boy, this service of thine to me will be for thy..." And he drank heartily, and said, "O thou boy, this service of thine to me will be for thy advantage. For if I once get clear of these my bonds, I will soon procure thee thy freedom of Caius, who has not been wanting to minister to me, now I am in bonds, in the same manner as when I was in my former state and dignity." Nor did he deceive him in what he promised him, but made him amends for what he had now done. For when afterward Agrippa was come to the kingdom, he took particular care of Thaumastus, and got him his liberty from Caius, and made him the steward over his own estate. And when he died, he left him to Agrippa his son, and to Bernice his daughter, to minister to them in the same capacity. The man also grew old in that honorable post, and therein died. But all this happened a good while later. Now Agrippa stood in his bonds before the royal palace, and leaned on a certain tree for grief, with many others, who were in bonds also. And as a certain bird sat upon the tree on which Agrippa leaned, the Romans call this bird bubo, an owl, one of those that were bound, a German by nation, saw him, and asked a soldier who that man in purple was. And when he was informed that his name was Agrippa, and that he was by nation a Jew, and one of the principal men of that nation, he asked leave of the soldier to whom he was bound, to let him come nearer to him, to speak with him, for that he had a mind to inquire of him about some things relating to his country. Which liberty when he had obtained, and as he stood near him, he said thus to him by an interpreter: "This sudden change of thy condition, O young man, is grievous to thee, as bringing on thee a manifold and very great adversity. How thou wilt get clear of this misery which thou art now under. and how divine providence will provide for thee. Know therefore, and I appeal to my own country gods, as well as to the gods of this place, who have awarded these bonds to us, that all I am going to say about thy concerns shall neither be said for favor, nor bribery, nor out of an endeavor to make thee cheerful without cause. For such predictions, when they come to fail, make the grief at last and in earnest more bitter than if the party had never heard of any such thing. However, though I run the hazard of my own self, I think it fit to declare to thee the prediction of the gods. It cannot be that thou shouldst long continue in these bonds, but thou wilt soon be delivered from them, and wilt be promoted to the highest dignity and power, and thou wilt be envied by all those who now pity thy hard fortune. And thou wilt be happy and wilt leave thine happiness to the children whom thou shalt have. But do thou remember, when thou seest this bird again, that thou wilt then live but 5 days longer. This event will be brought to pass by that God who hath sent this bird hither to be a sign unto thee. And I cannot but think it unjust to conceal from thee what I foreknow concerning thee, that, by thy knowing beforehand what happiness is coming upon thee, thou mayest not regard thy present misfortunes. But when this happiness shall actually befall thee, do not forget what misery I am in myself, but endeavor to deliver me." So when the German had said this, he made Agrippa laugh at him, as much as he afterwards appeared worthy of admiration. But now Antonia took Agrippa's misfortune to heart. However, to speak to Tiberius on his behalf she took to be a very difficult thing, and indeed quite impracticable as to any. Yet did she procure of Macro that the soldiers that kept him should be of a gentle nature, and that the centurion who was over them, and was to diet with him, should be of the same disposition, and that he might have leave to bathe himself every day, and that his freedmen and friends might come to him, and that other things that tended to ease him might be indulged him. So his friend Silas came in to him, and 2 of his freedmen, Marcius and Stechus, brought him such sorts of food as he was fond of, and indeed took great care of him. They also brought him garments, under pretense of selling them. And when night came on, they laid them under him, and the soldiers assisted them, as Macro had given them order to do beforehand. And this was Agrippa's condition for 6 months' time, and in this case were his affairs. But for Tiberius, upon his return to Caprein, he fell sick. At first his distemper was but gentle, but as that distemper increased upon him, he had small or no hopes of recovery. Hereupon he bid Euodus, who was that freedman whom he most of all respected, to bring the children to him, for that he wanted to talk to them before he died. Now he had at present no sons of his own alive, for Drusus, who was his only son, was dead. But Drusus's son Tiberius was still living, whose additional name was Gemellus. There was also living Caius, the son of Germanicus, who was the son of his brother Drusus. He was now grown up, and had a liberal education, and was well improved by it, and was in esteem and favor with the people, on account of the excellent character of his father Germanicus, who had attained among the multitude, by the firmness of his virtuous behavior, by the easiness and agreeableness of his conversing with the multitude, and because the dignity he was in did not hinder his familiarity with them all, as if they were his equals, by which behavior he was not only greatly esteemed by the people and the senate, but by every one of those nations that were subject to the Romans, some of which were affected when they came to him, with the gracefulness of their reception by him, and others were affected in the same manner by the report of the others that had been with him. And upon his death there was a lamentation made by all men, not such a one as was to be made in way of flattery to their rulers, while they did but counterfeit sorrow, but such as was real, while everybody grieved at his death, as if they had lost one that was near to them. And truly such had been his easy conversation, with greatly to the advantage of his son among all, And among others, the soldiery were so peculiarly affected to him, that they reckoned it an eligible thing, if need were, to die themselves, if he might but attain to the government. But when Tiberius had given order to Euodus to bring the children to him the next day in the morning, he prayed to his country gods to show him a manifest signal which of those children should come to the government. Being very desirous to leave it to his son's son, but still depending upon what God should foreshow concerning them more than upon his own opinion and inclination. So he made this to be the omen, that the government should be left to him who should come to him first the next day. When he had thus resolved within himself, he sent to his grandson's tutor, and ordered him to bring the child to him early in the morning, supposing that God would permit him to be made emperor. But God proved opposite to his designation. For while Tiberius was thus contriving matters, and as soon as it was at all day, he bid Euodus to call in that child which should be there ready. So he went out and found Caius before the door, for Tiberius was not yet come, but stayed waiting for his breakfast. For Euodus knew nothing of what his lord intended. So he said to Caius, "Thy father calls thee," and then brought him in. As soon as Tiberius saw Caius, and not before, he reflected on the power of God, and how the ability of bestowing the government on whom he would was entirely taken from him, and thence he was not able to establish what he had intended. So he greatly lamented that his power of establishing contrived was taken from him, and that his grandson Tiberius was not only to lose the Roman Empire by his fatality, but his own safety also, because his preservation would now depend upon such as would be more potent than himself, who would think it a thing not to be borne that a kinsman should live with them, and so his relation would not be able to protect him, but he would be feared and hated by him who had the supreme authority, partly on account of his being next to the empire, and partly on account of his perpetually contriving to get the government, both in order to preserve himself, and to be at the head of affairs also. Now Tiberius had been very much given to astrology and the calculation of nativities, and had spent his life in the esteem of what predictions had proved true, more than those whose profession it was. Accordingly, when he once saw Galba coming to him, he said to his most intimate friends, that there came in a man that would one day have the dignity of the Roman Empire, so that this Tiberius was more addicted to all such sorts of diviners than any other of the Roman emperors, because he had found them to have told him truth in his own affairs. And indeed he was now in great distress upon this accident that had befallen him, and was very much grieved at the destruction of his son's son, which he foresaw, and complained of himself, that he should have made use of such a method of divination beforehand, while it was in his power to have died without grief by this knowledge of futurity, whereas he was now tormented by his foreknowledge of the misfortune of such as were dearest to him, and must die under that torment. Now revolution of the government to those for whom he did not intend it, he spake thus to Caius, though unwillingly, and against his own inclination: "O child, although Tiberius be nearer related to me than thou art, I, by my own determination, and the conspiring suffrage of the gods, to give and put into thy hand the Roman empire, and I desire thee never to be unmindful when thou comest to it, either of my kindness to thee, who set thee in so high a dignity, or of thy relation to Tiberius. But as thou knowest that I am, together with and after the gods, the procurer of so great happiness to thee, so I desire that thou wilt make me a return for my readiness to assist thee, and wilt take care of Tiberius because of his near relation to thee. Besides which, thou art to know that while Tiberius is alive, he will be a security to thee, both as to empire and as in preservation, But if he die, that will be but a prelude to thy own misfortunes; for to be alone under the weight of such vast affairs is very dangerous. Nor will the gods suffer those actions which are unjustly done, contrary to that law which directs men to act otherwise, to go off unpunished." This was the speech which Tiberius made, which did not persuade Caius to act accordingly, although he promised to do so. But when he was settled in the government, he took off this Tiberius, as was predicted by the other Tiberius, as he was also himself in no long time afterward slain by a secret plot against him. So when Tiberius had at this time appointed Caius to be his successor, he outlived but a few days, and then died, after he had held the government 22 years, 5 months. Now Caius was the 4th emperor. But when the Romans understood that Tiberius was dead, they rejoiced at the good news, but had not courage to believe it; not because they were unwilling it should be true, for they would have given huge sums of money that it might be so, but because they were afraid that if they had showed their joy when the news proved false, their joy should be openly known, and they should be accused for it, and be thereby undone. For this Tiberius had brought a vast number of miseries on the best families of the Romans, since he was easily inflamed with passion in all cases, and was of such a temper as rendered his anger irrevocable, till he had executed the same, although he had taken a hatred against men without reason, for he was by nature fierce in all the sentences he gave, and made death the penalty for the lightest offenses; insomuch that when the Romans heard the rumor about his death gladly, they were restrained from the enjoyment of that pleasure by the dread of such miseries as they foresaw would follow, if their hopes proved ill-grounded. Now Marcius, Agrippa's freedman, as soon as he heard of Tiberius's death, came running to tell Agrippa the news; and finding him going out to the bath, he gave him a nod, and said in the Hebrew tongue, "The lion is dead," who, understanding his meaning, and being overjoyed at the news, "Nay," said he, "but all sorts of thanks and happiness attend thee for this news of thine; only I wish that what thou sayest may prove true." Now the centurion, who was set to keep Agrippa, when he saw with what haste Marcius came, and what joy Agrippa had from what he said, he had a suspicion that his words implied some great innovation of affairs, and he asked them about what was said. But upon his further pressing, Agrippa, without more ado, told him, for he was already become his friend. So he joined with him in that pleasure which this news occasioned, because it would be fortunate to Agrippa, and made him a supper. But as they were feasting, and the cups went about, there came one who said that Tiberius was still alive, and would return to the city ill a few days. At which news the centurion was exceedingly troubled, because he had done what might cost him his life, to have treated so joyfully a prisoner, and this upon the news of the death of Caesar. So he thrust Agrippa from the couch whereon he lay, and said, "Dost thou think to cheat me by a lie about the emperor without punishment? And shalt not thou pay for this thy malicious report at the price of thine head?" When he had so said, he ordered Agrippa to be bound again, for he had loosed him before, and kept a severer guard over him than formerly, and in that evil condition was Agrippa that night. But the next day the rumor increased in the city, and confirmed the news that Tiberius was certainly dead, insomuch that men durst now openly and freely talk about it; nay, some offered sacrifices on that account. Several letters also came from Caius, one of them to the Senate, which informed them of the death of Tiberius, and of his own entrance on the government; another to Piso, the governor of the city, which told him the same thing. He also gave order that Agrippa should be removed out of the camp, and go to that house where he lived before he was put in prison, so that he was now out of fear as to his own affairs; for although he was still in custody, yet it was now with ease to his own affairs. Now as soon as Caius was come to Rome, and had brought Tiberius's dead body with him, and had made a sumptuous funeral for him, according to the laws of his country, he was much disposed to set Agrippa at liberty that very day. But Antonia hindered him, not out of any ill will to the prisoner, but out of regard to decency in Caius, lest that should make men believe that he received the death of Tiberius with pleasure, when he loosed one whom he had bound immediately. However, there did not many days pass ere he sent for him to his house, and had him shaved, and made him change his raiment. After which he put a diadem upon his head, and appointed him to be king of the Tetrarchy of Philip. He also gave him the Tetrarchy of Lysanias, and changed his iron chain for a golden one of equal weight. He also sent Marullus, in the year of the reign of Caius Caesar. Agrippa desired leave to be given him to sail home, and settle the affairs of his government; and he promised to return again, when he had put the rest in order as it ought to be put. So upon the emperor's permission he came into his own country, and appeared to them all unexpectedly as asking, and thereby demonstrated to the men that saw him the power of fortune, when they compared his former poverty with his present happy affluence. So some called him a happy man, and others could not well believe that things were so much changed with him for the better. End of Book 18. Chapter 6.